I was 19 when they sent 12 of us into the jungle and told us it was a routine border patrol. Only 3 of us came back. None of us agreed on what we saw: a beast, a shadow, a god. But we all agreed on one thing. It was not looking at us like prey. It was looking at us like it remembered us. Like it had been waiting since before the ice melted. I've spent 38 years trying to forget its eye. I can't. The envelope had no return address, and that should have told me everything. I remember the paper first. Thick, waxed, sealed with a stamp I didn't recognize. Not the usual crest, just 3 interlocking circles pressed into red wax, like a signature no one was supposed to read twice. My captain handed it to me on a Tuesday morning in March 1933, and he didn't meet my eyes when he did it. "Routine escort," he said. "Geological survey, you'll be back in 2 weeks." I was 19 years old, and I believed him, because 19-year-olds believe the men who feed them. There were 12 of us. Rodriguez, who couldn't stop cracking his knuckles. Alvarez, barely 18, who'd lied about his age to enlist. Delgado, our sergeant, a man who'd survived 3 border skirmishes and wore that survival like armor. And me, just a scout, good with a rifle, better with silence. We met the science team at the rail depot 2 days later. 4 of them, led by a woman named Dr. Ibarra, sharp-eyed, precise, carrying a leather case she never let out of her sight. She didn't look like a geologist. Geologists don't flinch when a train whistle blows. "What exactly are we surveying?" I asked her once on the platform. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've already decided not to answer. "Mineral deposits," she said. The words came out too fast, too rehearsed. The maps we were given were worse than useless. Entire regions of the interior jungle were blacked out in red ink. Not crossed out, not marked unknown, just erased, like someone had taken a blade to reality itself and told the cartographer to draw around the wound. When I asked Delgado why a mineral survey needed 12 armed men, he told me to shut up and check my ammunition. I checked my ammunition. We boarded trucks that took us as far as the roads allowed, then walked. The jungle swallowed the road behind us within an hour, vines closing over the tire tracks like a mouth closing over a secret. The air turned thick, wet, alive with the screech of birds and the drone of insects so constant it became a kind of silence itself. Rodriguez cracked jokes about headhunters. Alvarez laughed too loud at all of them. I noticed Delgado didn't laugh at all. I noticed the scientists carried more equipment than any survey team needed. Crates marked with stenciled numbers instead of names. One case, guarded more carefully than the rest, hummed faintly when you walked too close to it. A low mechanical vibration, like something breathing behind glass. "What's in that one?" I asked Ibarra on the second night, when the fire had burned low and the others slept. She stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Instruments," she said, "for measuring things that shouldn't need measuring." I didn't understand what she meant. I wish I still didn't. The third night, I woke to find her standing at the edge of camp, facing the tree line, utterly still. Not sleepwalking, not startled, just watching something I couldn't see, with the expression of a woman confirming a fear rather than discovering one. "Doctor?" She didn't turn. "Do you hear that?" I listened. The insects had stopped, every single one. The birds had gone quiet too, all at once, like a hand had reached down and muted the entire jungle. I'd grown up in places like this. I knew what silence in the wild usually meant. A predator, close, patient. But this silence had a different texture. It didn't feel like something hunting. It felt like something listening back. "Probably nothing," I said, because that's what you say when you're 19 and scared and don't want to be either. Ibarra finally looked at me. Her eyes, in the dying firelight, held something I didn't have a name for yet. "Nothing doesn't do that," she said. "Nothing doesn't make the whole jungle hold its breath." I laughed it off. I told her to get some sleep. I sat awake instead, rifle across my knees, watching the dark tree line for movement that never came. Not that night. But something had shifted. I felt it in my teeth, a pressure behind my molars like the moment before a thunderclap that never arrives. The compass on my belt, when I checked it out of nervous habit, wasn't pointing north. It was spinning, slow and lazy, like a child's toy winding down, except it never stopped. It just kept turning, searching for a direction that no longer existed in that patch of earth. I didn't tell the others. I told myself it was a broken instrument, nothing more. The kind of malfunction that happens in humid climates to cheap military equipment. I wanted, badly, for that to be true. By morning, 3 of the birds we'd seen roosting in the canopy the night before were lying dead on the jungle floor, wings unbroken, bodies untouched, as if something had simply reached into them and switched them off. Sergeant Delgado ordered us to keep moving. Dr. Ibarra didn't argue. She just picked up her humming case and walked faster than the rest of us, like she was trying to outpace a memory she hadn't made yet. We crossed into the blacked-out region of the map at noon. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space of a single footstep, and none of us, not one of us, said a word about it, because we were all too afraid that speaking it aloud would make it real. The line wasn't visible. It was felt, like walking through an invisible curtain of cold water in the middle of a jungle that had no business being cold at all. One moment, sweat soaked through my collar in the usual wet heat. The next, goose flesh rose along my arms, and my breath, impossibly, began to fog in front of my face. Rodriguez stopped walking first. Did anyone else feel that? Nobody answered because everybody had. I looked behind us. The jungle we'd just walked through still buzzed and screeched with normal living noise. Insects, birds, the distant chatter of monkeys in the high canopy. But ahead of us, past some threshold none of us could see, there was nothing. No bird song, no insect drone, no wind moving through leaves. Just the sound of our own boots against soil, and beneath that, if I strained hard enough to hear it, something else. A hum. Low. Constant. Not from the crate this time. From everywhere. From the ground itself, maybe. Or from the air. Dr. Ibarra's face lit up the way a starving man's face lights up at the smell of bread. She pulled instruments from her case, brass devices with dials and needles I'd never seen before, and began taking readings with trembling, excited hands. "This is it," she muttered. "This is exactly what the reports described." "What reports?" I asked. She didn't answer. None of the scientists ever answered a direct question. I was starting to understand that their silence wasn't professional discretion. It was fear dressed up as procedure. We pressed forward into the dead zone. That's what I started calling it, privately, in my head. The jungle around us hadn't changed shape. The trees were the same trees, the vines the same vines. But everything alive had gone still, as if the entire ecosystem had collectively decided to stop breathing rather than draw the attention of whatever lived here. My compass had stopped spinning by then. It had simply stopped working altogether, needle frozen at a bearing that corresponded to nothing on any map I'd ever studied. Alvarez, walking beside me, kept glancing at his own shadow. "Something wrong?" I asked him. He didn't laugh this time. "My shadow," he said. "I swear it moved before I did. Just now, just a second before my foot came down, the shadow was already there." I told him he was tired. I told myself the same thing. But that night, when we made camp inside the dead zone, I watched my own shadow stretch long and thin against a tree trunk in the firelight. And for one heartbeat, one single suspended heartbeat, it seemed to lag half a second behind my movement, like film reels running out of sync. I didn't sleep. None of us did. Not really. We took turns pretending to. Dr. Ibarra spent the night huddled with her team over their instruments, speaking in hushed, urgent tones I wasn't meant to hear. I caught fragments anyway. Words like temporal displacement, anomalous density, consistent with the '09 reports. I didn't know what any of it meant. I only knew that scientists don't whisper about mineral surveys. Near dawn, Delgado pulled me aside, away from the fire, out of earshot of the others. "You're a good scout," he said. "Best eyes in the unit. I need you honest with me. Are you seeing things that shouldn't be there?" I thought about the compass, the shadow, the dead birds, the silence that pressed against my eardrums like water pressure at depth. "Yes, Sergeant," I said. "I think we all are." He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a diagnosis he already suspected. "Command didn't tell me everything either," he admitted, voice low enough that even the jungle couldn't carry it. "They told me there'd been other patrols out here, years back, 1909, maybe earlier. Only one man came back from the last one. He didn't speak again, not one word, for the rest of his life. Just drew pictures, endless pictures, of the same thing." "What thing?" Delgado's jaw tightened. "They never told me that part." The fire guttered low. Somewhere in the canopy above us, something shifted. Not a bird, not a monkey. Something far too heavy for the branch it moved along, and yet the branch didn't so much as creak beneath the weight. I raised my rifle instinctively. Nothing was there when I looked. Nothing I could see anyway. We broke camp at first light and pushed deeper. The ground began to change beneath our boots, soft jungle loam giving way, patch by patch, to something harder. Stone, smooth and dark, veined with a pale mineral none of us recognized. Dr. Ibarra knelt beside one such patch and pressed her palm flat against it, and her face went the color of old paper. "This shouldn't be here," she whispered. "What shouldn't?" She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw real fear behind her scientist's composure. Not curiosity anymore, not excitement. Fear. "This stone," she said, "it's not indigenous to this region. It's not indigenous to anywhere I've cataloged. And it's cold, colder than the air around it, like it remembers being ice." That was when we found the first footprint. Not in soil, in stone, pressed into solid rock as easily as a boot print presses into wet sand. 4 toes and a heel the size of a dinner table, and the edges of the impression were sharp, fresh, uneroded by wind or rain or time. Whatever made that print had walked through solid stone like it was nothing at all, and it had walked through recently. Dr. Ibarra's hands shook as she measured the print, and scientists' hands aren't supposed to shake. She knelt over the impression with calipers, murmuring measurements to her assistant, who wrote them down in a notebook already half filled with figures that made no sense to me. The print was easily 4 feet across, 5 clawed toes splayed wide, a heel pad deep enough to swallow a man's forearm to the elbow. But it was the stone itself that unsettled her most, not the size of the track, but the fact that it existed at all. "Rock doesn't take footprints," she said, mostly to herself. "Rock records footprints only across geological time, sediment compressing over millennia into stone, with the print already inside it before it hardened. This print is on top of solid stone, something pressed into rock that had already finished becoming rock, the way you'd press a thumb into wet clay." "Meaning what?" Delgado asked. She looked up at him, and I watched a trained scientist struggle to say a sentence her training had never prepared her to say. "Meaning whatever made this print didn't just walk across the ground," she said. "It walked across the ground as if the ground was still deciding what it wanted to be." The team took soil samples, rock samples, scraped mineral traces into small glass vials. One of the younger scientists, a nervous man named Torres who rarely spoke, ran some kind of test I didn't understand, using a device that clicked erratically, like a telegraph key stuttering through a message it couldn't finish sending. "The carbon dating doesn't work," Torres finally said, staring at his own instrument like it had betrayed him. "It's returning results that put this rock at 12,000 years old, 15,000, numbers that don't stabilize. It keeps changing every time I test it, like the rock's age isn't fixed, like it's not one age, like it's all the ages, all at once." Nobody spoke for a long moment. The jungle around us, what remained of it this far into the dead zone, held its breath along with us. "That's not possible," Delgado said finally, in the flat voice of a man asserting something he no longer fully believed. "No," Dr. Ibarra agreed quietly. "It isn't." She used a word then that I would carry with me for the rest of my life, the way you carry a splinter too deep to remove. "Preserved." she whispered, staring at the footprint like it was staring back. This whole region, it's preserved, like something sealed a piece of the world away and forgot, or refused, to let time move through it the way time moves through everywhere else. I asked the question that had been building in my chest since the train platform. Preserved for what? Nobody answered. Not because they didn't know. Because I think, by then, they were beginning to suspect. And the suspicion was worse than any answer could have been. We found more tracks as the day wore on, dozens of them, crossing and recrossing an area roughly the size of a parade ground, some fresh, some ancient, all pressed into that same impossible stone. Some tracks simply stopped mid-stride, as if the creature that made them had taken one step and then ceased to exist between one footfall and the next. Alvarez found the carcasses near sundown. He called us over in a voice pitched high with panic he was trying and failing to control. What lay in the small stone clearing had once been an animal, a tapir, from the shape of what remained. But it had been frozen, not killed, frozen, solid. In a single instant, ice crystals still visible along its frost-rimed hide, despite the tropical heat pressing in from every direction. Its eyes were open. Its legs were mid-stride, caught in the act of running from something. Dr. Ibarra touched the carcass and recoiled as though burned, except it was the opposite of burned. Her fingertips came away white with frostbite in seconds, in 90-degree heat. "It's not decomposing," Torres said, backing away. "It should have rotted weeks ago in this climate. It hasn't rotted at all. It's just stopped, like a photograph." That night, none of us pretended to sleep. We built the fire high and sat in a tight circle, weapons within reach, while the scientists argued in hushed, frightened tones about theories I only half understood, pockets of space that didn't obey the same physical laws as the world around them, localized fields that could suspend decay, freeze time itself within a boundary too specific to be natural and too vast to be man-made. "Someone built this," Ibarra said at one point, and the words landed among us like a dropped rifle. "Or something did. This isn't a natural phenomenon. Natural phenomena don't have edges you can walk across. Natural phenomena don't have a silence line." "Then what is it?" I asked. She looked toward the dark tree line, where the ancient stone tracks vanished into deeper jungle, deeper cold, deeper wrongness. "A cage," she said. "Or an exhibit. I don't know which is worse." The fire cracked and spat sparks into the black air. Somewhere far off, impossibly far and yet impossibly close, the way sound travels wrong in bad dreams, something exhaled. A long, low sound, deep enough that I felt it in my sternum before I heard it in my ears. Not a roar, not a growl. Something closer to a sigh, ancient and patient, like a god shifting in its sleep. Every man in that circle went rigid. Delgado's hand found his rifle. Alvarez made a small sound in his throat that wasn't quite a word. "That," Torres whispered, "came from everywhere." He was right. It hadn't come from the north, or the south, or any single direction at all. It had come from around us, from the jungle, from the stone, from the sky itself, as if the entire dead zone had breathed out at once, a single lung the size of a landscape. The fire, for just a moment, bent sideways, toward us, as though pulled by a wind that didn't exist. And then, from the tree line, we heard something enormous begin, very slowly, to move. It came out of the dark, like the dark itself had grown teeth. I want to describe it clearly, the way Delgado always taught us to report: size, distance, direction, threat level. But clarity is the first thing that dies when your mind meets something it has no framework to hold. I can tell you it was massive, taller at the shoulder than any elephant I'd ever seen in photographs, built low and heavy like something designed to survive an age of ice that ended before humans learned to speak. Matted fur, pale as bone, hung in ropes from a frame that seemed to bend the moonlight around it rather than reflect it. Its head was too large for its body. Its eyes, when they caught the firelight, glowed the wrong color entirely. Not red, not amber, a color I don't have a word for because it isn't a color that belongs to anything alive. Rodriguez screamed first. I don't blame him. I nearly did the same. Delgado barked the order to fire, and we did. 12 rifles, point-blank range, a full volley into a creature the size of a small building. I felt the recoil punch my shoulder. I saw the muzzle flashes light up its hide. Nothing happened. Not it shrugged off the bullets. Not it barely flinched. I mean, nothing happened. No impact, no blood, no sound of metal meeting flesh. The bullets simply ceased to exist somewhere between the barrel and the target, as if they had been fired into a moment that hadn't happened yet, or one that had already finished happening somewhere else. "Reload!" Delgado screamed, and we did, hands shaking, and we fired again. And again nothing struck home, and the creature did not charge, did not flee, did not react at all to 12 rifles unloading directly into its enormous ancient body. It simply watched us, and that was the moment I understood, really understood, in my gut, past all military training, that we were not fighting an animal. It moved then, and the movement broke something fundamental in how I understood the world. One instant, it stood 40 feet away, motionless, regarding us with those wrong-colored eyes. The next instant, with no motion in between, no blur of speed, no closing of distance, it stood 20 feet closer, not faster than the eye could follow, absent from the space between. Like a page had been torn out of the moment, and the next page simply began with the creature already there. Alvarez fell backward into the fire pit, scrambling away on his hands, screaming something in Spanish I couldn't fully make out through his own terror. "It's not moving through space!" Torres shouted, backing away with his instruments clutched to his chest like a shield. "It's skipping it! It's not here and then here. It's here and not here and here again, like the space between doesn't apply to it." Dr. Ibarra stood frozen, staring at the creature with an expression I can only describe as horrified recognition. The look of someone seeing, at last, in the flesh, a thing she had only ever read about in reports too classified to fully believe. "The 09 patrol," she breathed. "This is what the survivor drew. This is what he drew 10,000 times and never once got right, because there's no way to draw something that isn't fully here." The creature tilted its impossible head, and for one suspended moment, I felt something press against the inside of my skull. Not pain, not quite, but pressure, the sensation of being examined by something that didn't look with eyes the way we look with eyes. It looked with something deeper, something that read the shape of a soul instead of a face. Then it was gone. Not fled, not retreated. Gone. Vanished between one blink and the next, the way it had appeared, leaving behind only the ringing silence of a jungle too afraid to make a sound, and 12 men standing in a loose, trembling circle, rifles empty, courage emptier still. "We need to go," Delgado said, and his voice cracked on the second word, a voice I had never once heard crack in 3 years of border patrols and skirmishes. Command said 2 weeks. "We're leaving, now." Nobody argued. We broke camp in the dark, gathering only what we could carry, and started back the way we'd come. Back toward the silence line, back toward the ordinary jungle, back toward a world that still obeyed rules we understood. We walked for 3 hours by my count, moving fast, moving scared, following the same trail we'd cut coming in. We arrived back at the exact clearing where we'd made camp the night before. The fire pit was still smoldering. Alvarez's discarded canteen still lay where he'd dropped it near the tree line. We had walked in a complete circle without ever turning. Dr. Ibarra sat down hard on a fallen log, her composure finally, entirely gone, and put her face in her hands. "It's not letting us leave," she said, and her voice, muffled through her fingers, was the most frightened sound I had ever heard a grown adult make. "The jungle isn't a jungle anymore. It's a wall. We're not lost. We're contained. Panic is quiet before it's loud." I learned that in the hour after we realized we'd walked in a circle. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. We simply stood in that clearing. The same dying fire, the same canteen on the ground, exactly where Alvarez had dropped it, and let the impossibility of it settle over us like the cold that had no business being in a jungle. Delgado tried again. He picked a star, one of the few visible through gaps in the canopy, and used it to set a bearing, the way any good soldier navigates when compasses fail. We walked for 2 more hours, careful, disciplined, checking our heading against the sky every few hundred yards. We arrived back at the clearing again. This time, Rodriguez did scream, a short, ragged sound quickly swallowed by his own hand clamped over his mouth, as though he were afraid the scream itself might draw something toward us. "That's not possible," he kept repeating, quieter each time, like a man trying to argue himself back into sanity. That's not possible, that's not possible left an hour ago," Torres said, and there was something almost hysterical in how calmly he said it. Possible isn't coming back. Time itself began behaving the way the ground had behaved, unreliably, like a rule that had quietly resigned. Alvarez had gone to relieve himself at the tree line shortly after we made the second, failed attempt to leave. He was gone perhaps 60 seconds by anyone's count. When he returned, he was pale, hollow-eyed, and 3 days older, not figuratively. His stubble had grown out. His uniform hung looser on a frame that had visibly thinned, as though he'd gone without food for days. "What happened to you?" Delgado demanded, gripping his shoulders. Alvarez stared at us like we were strangers. "I was gone for days," he whispered. "I walked and walked, and it was always just trees. And then I heard you calling my name, and I came back, and it's only been—" He looked around at the fire, still burning at roughly the same height it had been when he left. "It's only been a minute for you, hasn't it? Hasn't it?" Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. Dr. Ibarra, to her credit, tried to think her way through it even as her hands trembled around her instruments. She theorized aloud, half to us, half to herself, that we weren't lost in a jungle at all, that the jungle itself was a kind of shell, a false skin stretched over something else entirely, and that the true geography beneath it didn't operate on distance or direction the way our minds expected. "We keep trying to walk out," she said, staring at the canteen that had never moved. "As if out is a direction here. What if it isn't? What if the only way this place lets you leave is if it decides you're allowed to?" "Then we're not lost," Torres said, voice flat with dawning horror. "We're kept." That word did something to the men that gunfire hadn't. Rodriguez sat down heavily, hands pressed over his ears as if he could block out a truth rather than a sound. Alvarez, older by 3 days in the span of 1 minute, began to cry without making any noise at all. Tears simply running down a face that had aged past its right to. I remember looking up at the narrow strip of sky visible through the canopy, hoping, foolishly, desperately, to see stars I recognized, some fixed point of the ordinary universe I could hold on to. The stars were wrong. Not absent, not different constellations, just wrong, subtly, the way a word looks wrong after you've stared at it too long. Familiar shapes rearranged by degrees too small to name but too large to ignore. "The jungle isn't a jungle," Ibarra said again, quieter this time, almost to herself, as though she were trying the sentence on to see if it still fit. "We're inside something, a preserve, a boundary. Whatever made those tracks, whatever we saw last night, this is where it lives, and this is where it's always lived, sealed away from the rest of the world by something that isn't natural and isn't man-made either." "Then what is it?" Delgado asked, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice held no command in it at all, just a frightened man asking a frightened woman a question neither of them wanted answered. Ibarra didn't get to respond. The ground beneath us shifted. Not an earthquake, nothing so ordinary. It was as if the entire clearing had taken a single breath and let it out slowly, the soil rising and falling beneath our boots like the chest of something enormous and sleeping just beneath the surface of the world. Loose stones clattered. The fire guttered sideways, flames bending at an angle that gravity didn't permit. My own body felt momentarily weightless, lifted a half-inch off the ground before settling back down, as though the very concept of down had briefly forgotten which way it pointed. Torres's instruments, The clicking, humming devices the science team had guarded since the train platform all failed at once, needles slamming to their farthest limits and staying there, frozen, smoke curling faintly from at least one housing. "Something's happening," Torres said, unnecessarily, uselessly, the way people state the obvious when the obvious has become too enormous to hold any other words. Dr. Ibarra rose to her feet, her earlier composure entirely gone now, replaced by something closer to reverent terror. She was staring past the fire, past the tree line, up through the gap in the canopy toward the strip of wrong-starred sky. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, it's not below us." "What isn't?" I asked, though some cowardly animal part of me already didn't want the answer. She raised one shaking finger toward the sky. "It's up there," she said. "It's been up there the whole time." I have relived that moment more times than I've allowed myself to count, and each time I hope it will look smaller. It never does. The canopy above us didn't part like foliage bending in wind. It tore, a sound like sailcloth ripping combined with something deeper, a groan of pressure releasing from some unimaginable structural tension, as if the sky itself had been holding its breath for 10,000 years and had finally, catastrophically, let it go. Leaves and branches didn't fall so much as scatter, flung outward in every direction like debris from an explosion that made no fire and no smoke, only silence and displaced air pressing down on us like a physical hand. Through the widening tear, we didn't see stars, we saw an eye. I don't have better words than that, and I've had 38 years to find them. It was vast beyond any scale my mind was built to process. Not simply large, but large in the way a mountain range is large compared to a single stone, large enough that large stopped being a useful word at all. Its surface held the pale, frost-rimed texture of ancient ice, veined through with the same dark mineral we'd found in the stone footprints, as though the eye and the tracks and the beast were all fragments cut from the same impossible material. The iris, if I can call it that, held colors that made my vision ache to look at directly. The same wrong color the creature's eyes had held the night before, except vaster now, deep enough to fall into, patient enough that I understood, in one sickening instant, that the beast we'd encountered was not the largest thing in that jungle. It was the smallest, a splinter, a single tooth, a single cell, shed from something so much larger that the beast itself might not have been a separate creature at all. Only an extension, a limb, a fragment of attention belonging to whatever hung above the canopy, patient as glaciers, older than the concept of patience itself. Gravity failed first. Not all at once. It flickered, the way a lamp flickers before its filament finally dies, moments of true weightlessness alternating with moments of crushing, doubled weight that drove men to their knees. Rodriguez was lifted a full foot off the ground and hung there, suspended, screaming, before gravity reasserted itself and dropped him hard onto stone, with a sound I still hear some nights. Sound itself began arriving wrong. I heard Delgado's voice shout a warning a full second before I saw his mouth move to form the words. Cause-chasing effect instead of the other way around. My mind trying and failing to reconcile an order of events that had simply come unstitched. And then came the worst of it. I watched Torres's face, youngish, maybe 25, ripple through age in the space of 3 heartbeats, skin loosening, hair paling, eyes sinking into hollows that hadn't been there a moment before, only to snap back to youth just as fast, leaving him gasping on the ground, clutching his own face like a man checking that his skull hadn't come apart. Alvarez's earlier aging, those 3 days he'd lost in a single minute. I understood then. It hadn't been an anomaly. It had been a sample. A small, careless brush of whatever pressure radiated down from that vast eye above us, applied without malice, without even particular interest, the way a man might absently drum his fingers on a table without noticing the ants beneath his hand. "It's not looking at the jungle," Dr. Ibarra said, and her voice had gone past fear into something flatter, more terrible. The voice of someone arriving, finally, fully, at a truth too large to resist. "It's not looking at the beast. It's looking at us. It noticed us. We walked into its field of vision, and it turned to look, and just the edge of that attention is enough to unmake everything we think we understand about how the world works. I want to tell you I responded with courage. I didn't. I stood rooted to that ancient stone, rifle useless in my hands, staring up into an eye the size of a valley, and I understood. The way you understand a truth in your marrow rather than your mind. That we were not explorers who had stumbled upon something ancient. We were insects who had wandered into the sightline of something that had been sleeping, or waiting, or simply existing since long before the ice that shaped this jungle had ever melted. The eye did not blink. I don't believe it needed to. But something in its vast, frozen iris shifted, a slow, deliberate contraction, like a lens narrowing its focus. And I felt that focus land on me specifically, a pressure behind my sternum, a cold spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being, for one unbearable instant, fully seen by something that had no reason to care whether I lived or died, and every capacity to decide either. Alvarez broke first. He didn't scream. He simply stood, turned toward the tree line, and walked directly into the dark at a steady, unhurried pace, as though he'd been called by name and was simply, finally, answering. Delgado shouted for him to stop. Alvarez didn't so much as slow his stride. That was the last time any of us saw him whole. The screaming that followed wasn't fear. I need you to understand that distinction, because I've carried it for 38 years, and it's the detail that still wakes me at night. Fear has a shape. Fear sounds like men who still believe, somewhere underneath the terror, that survival is possible. What came out of Rodriguez 20 minutes after Alvarez vanished into the tree line was something else entirely. The sound of a mind arriving at the end of its own usefulness and simply, quietly, giving up the argument. "They're not us," he kept saying, backing away from Torres, from Delgado, from me, rifle shaking in hands that no longer seemed to belong to him. "It already replaced you, all of you. Back at the fire. I saw it happen. I saw the shapes change and then change back, and you don't even know it happened to you, do you? You don't even know." "Rodriguez," Delgado said, low, careful, the voice of a man trying to talk a friend down off something narrow and high. "Nobody's been replaced. Put the rifle down." That's exactly what a copy would say. I watched belief die in a grown man's eyes in real time, the way you'd watch a candle drown in its own melted wax. He raised his rifle, and for one endless second I thought he meant to fire on Delgado, or on Torres, or on me, but he turned it on himself instead, fast, before any of us could close the distance, and the sound it made was small and flat and utterly wrong against the vast, groaning silence pressing down from that torn open sky. Delgado didn't flinch. I think, by then, some part of him had already stopped expecting the world to make the kind of sense that would let a man's death feel large enough to react to. He gathered what remained of us, myself, Torres, Dr. Ibarra, one other soldier named Cruz, who had said almost nothing since the eye first opened above the canopy. And he spoke in the flat, hollow voice of a commanding officer already certain his command no longer meant anything. "We're not walking out of here," he said. "You all understand that now, so we're not going to try. We're going to sit, and we're going to wait. And if that thing wants something from us, it can come and take it, because I am done pretending I have any say in what happens next." Dr. Ibarra, remarkably, still had enough of her scientific mind left to keep speaking, even as her voice frayed at the edges. "The reports," she said, mostly to herself, flipping through soaked, half-ruined notes with trembling fingers. The '09 survivor. He didn't go mad from what he saw. He went mad because whatever's up there noticed him seeing it, and that noticing rewired something fundamental in how his mind held together. We're not being hunted. We're being cataloged, measured, the way you'd measure ants under a glass, without hatred, without cruelty, just acknowledgement. An acknowledgement from something that size is enough to break a man in half. Cruz began laughing then, not madness exactly, or maybe exactly that, a low, helpless, breathless laugh that went on far longer than the moment could justify. "A glass," he repeated. "We're ants under a glass. 10,000 years, and we're the first ants smart enough to look up and see the hand. Torres was the one who finally voiced the theory none of us had let ourselves finish. He'd been quiet a long while, staring at his ruined instruments, at the frozen needles, at the smoke still curling faintly from their housings. "The tracks," he said. "The frozen animal. The stone that won't settle on an age. I think this whole region, this whole jungle, isn't a jungle that something moved into. I think it's a containment field, and the beast is what it's containing, or what's inside the containment with us, and the eye up there isn't a separate thing at all. I think the eye is the field. I think we've been standing inside its pupil this entire time, and it just now decided to focus." Nobody responded. There wasn't a response that fit. Delgado shot me a look across the fire, the closest thing to an order he had left in him. And I understood it, without words. Stop looking up. Whatever happens, stop looking up. I obeyed. I stared at my own boots, at the ancient veined stone beneath them, and I listened as the world continued coming apart around us. Gravity flickering, sound arriving unstitched from its cause, the low, groaning hum from the torn sky deepening into something that vibrated in my back teeth, my sternum, the small bones of my inner ear. Cruz stopped laughing abruptly, mid-breath, and simply sat down where he stood, staring at nothing, his eyes gone entirely vacant. Not dead, not asleep, just elsewhere, as though whatever remained of his attention had been drawn upward and hadn't yet found its way back into his body. Torres, beside me, began speaking numbers under his breath, quiet strings of digits that meant nothing to me, over and over, a man trying to hold on to the shape of mathematics as a life raft in water that no longer obeyed buoyancy. Dr. Ibarra sat closest to the fire, knees drawn to her chest, watching the last of her instruments finally, completely fail. And I heard her whisper something that I think was meant as a prayer, though I couldn't tell you to whom or to what, given what hung above us claiming every direction a prayer might have traveled. I kept my eyes on my boots. I kept them there for what felt like hours, though I no longer trusted hours to mean what they used to mean. When dawn, or something resembling dawn, finally broke, only 3 of us were left capable of standing. The rescue team found us at the edge of the dead zone 2 days later, exactly where the silence line had first crossed our path, though none of us could account for how we'd traveled there or when. They didn't ask what happened. That was the detail that told me, more than anything else, that they already knew. They separated us before we'd even finished walking free of the tree line. 3 of us survived, myself, Dr. Ibarra, and Torres. Delgado, I never saw again after the rescue team's trucks split us into different vehicles at a checkpoint that hadn't existed on any map 2 weeks earlier. I asked about him once, months later, through channels I probably shouldn't have used. I was told politely that no record existed of a Sergeant Delgado ever being assigned to our unit. The debriefing rooms were small, windowless, lit by a single hanging bulb that hummed faintly. A hum I recognized immediately, viscerally, the way you recognize a scar. I told my story exactly as it happened. The officer across the table wrote almost nothing down. When I finished, he told me, without a trace of doubt in his voice, that I was suffering from jungle fever and heat exhaustion, common among patrol units unfamiliar with deep interior terrain. I told him about the eye. He told me hallucination was a documented symptom. I told him about the beast that bullets passed through. He told me trauma does strange things to memory, and that I should be grateful to be alive, and that I should sign the papers in front of me acknowledging the classified nature of the operation and the consequences of ever discussing it. I signed them. We all signed them. What choice does a 19-year-old have, sitting across from a government that has already decided what the truth is going to be? I was never permitted to read the full report again. I know only fragments, pulled from later conversations, whispered corridors, a drink shared decades later with a records clerk who'd seen more than his job description allowed. The '09 patrol Dr. Ibarra had referenced was real. So was the sole survivor who never spoke again, who spent the remainder of his life in a quiet institutional room, drawing the same shape over and over, an eye, ringed with frost, hanging where sky should be. Until the day he died, still unable to explain what he'd drawn or why he couldn't stop. Our patrol became the second such case on file. I have no reason to believe we were the last. Satellite photography, decades later, when such things existed, and I finally had the clearance-adjacent curiosity to go looking, still shows that patch of jungle as a blank gray square on every publicly available map. No data, no explanation, a hole in the world's cartography exactly the size and shape of the boundary we crossed in 1933. I've stared at that gray square more nights than I'd like to admit, in atlases, in old government surplus documents that were never supposed to leave the building they came from. Dr. Ibarra, I heard, continued her research for another decade under a different name, in a different department, studying phenomena the rest of the world was never told existed. Torres, I lost track of entirely. Some part of me hopes he found peace. A larger part of me doubts peace was ever available to any of us again. As for me, I built a quiet life, married, had children, grandchildren now. I never told them the whole truth, only enough to explain why I flinch at silence, why I can't sleep beneath open sky, why I've never once, in 38 years, been able to look directly upward on a clear, star-lit night without my chest tightening and my breath catching somewhere behind my sternum. I don't believe we killed a beast in that jungle. We never even wounded it. I don't believe we escaped either. Not really. Not in the way survival is supposed to feel. I believe something ancient and patient allowed 3 insects to wander back out of its field of vision because we were never worth the effort of keeping, a fragment of attention withdrawn as casually as it had been extended. I believe that beast, the frozen, impossible Ice Age thing that should have died with its era, was never the true anomaly in that jungle. It was a tooth, a splinter, a single small piece of something so vast that human language runs out of scale before it runs out of subject. And I believe, though I can offer no proof beyond what my own eyes recorded, that whatever hung above that torn canopy is still there, still patient, still watching, not out of malice, not out of hunger, but out of the same idle attention a man might spare an anthill he happens to notice while walking past. Attention that could vanish again in an instant, or could, without warning, sharpen its focus once more and decide this time to look a little closer. Some nights, when the wind dies and the world outside my window goes unnaturally still, I feel it again. That old pressure behind my sternum, that sense of being measured rather than merely existing. I tell myself it's an old man's fear, worn smooth by decades of retelling. But I stopped looking up a long time ago. I'd advise you do the same. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore and dramatized for narrative purposes.